Before we start, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. Your support helps me bring you more powerful life stories that truly touch the heart. Thank you for being here. The night proved difficult, as if the very air in the house had thickened and pressed against her chest. Sarah tossed and turned, unable to find comfort. The bed felt too cold, the pillows uncomfortable, and her thoughts kept drifting back to her past life, to Michael. It had been 3 years since he left this world. But sometimes it seemed to her that he was still somewhere nearby. She would catch a whiff of his cologne in the hallway, or hear footsteps in the workshop where he used to repair clocks and lamps. This night was especially restless. The wind battered the shutters with force. The old house creaked with every gust, and from the street came a rumbling sound, as if the earth itself was sighing in anguish. Sarah finally dozed off. Sleep covered her suddenly, like a dark blanket, and immediately became strange. She stood in the same house, in her bedroom, but the walls looked foreign, and the moonlight was too bright, harsh, as if everything around was illuminated by spotlights. And suddenly she saw Michael, the husband she had buried with her own hands. He wore that same plaid shirt he loved to wear at home. His face seemed so familiar, yet not as it had been in life, pale, as if carved from marble, but his eyes burned with a living, anxious light, as if energy pulsed there that could not be contained. Sarah froze in disbelief. She was afraid to move, afraid to breathe loudly, because she understood that if this was a dream, he would disappear. But Michael himself took a step forward. His lips trembled, and he spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, but so that every word pierced her heart. "Get up, Sarah, and run immediately." She was thrown into fever. His words were not like the soothing whisper of a ghost. They sounded like a verdict, a warning, a desperate cry. She wanted to ask, "Why, where, what's happening?" But her lips wouldn't obey. Only trembling passed through her body. And she noticed that his hands were reaching out to her. Michael touched her palms, and then Sarah understood. This was no ordinary dream. The cold of his fingers was real, freezing, unimaginably genuine. He held her tightly, almost painfully, and this grip desperately reminded her of how he had protected her in life. She heard blood pounding in her ears. "Don't ask questions," he added in a whisper, looking straight into her eyes. "Run." His voice became sharper. His face contorted with anxiety. He pushed her toward the door, but at the same time began to dissolve like smoke, like a shadow that fades at midnight. The stronger she reached for him, the faster he disappeared. Only an echo remained of his voice in her head, like the toll of a bell in an empty church. Sarah woke up, sitting up sharply in bed. Cold sweat on her forehead, heart pounding, and her husband's words ringing inside as if spoken just now. It seemed to her that the room was full of someone else's breathing. She didn't immediately realize it had been a dream. It was too real. She covered her face with her hands, trying to convince herself it had all been imagination. But deep inside, where primal fear lives, she knew this had been a warning. Sarah sat up sharply in bed. Her heart pounded as if it would burst out. The room was shrouded in darkness. Only the cold light of the moon broke through the curtains, drawing pale spots on the floor. She couldn't catch her breath. The dream wouldn't let go. Her husband's words sounded clearer and clearer in her head. "Get up and run immediately." She listened carefully. Silence filled the house, so thick and oppressive that it seemed as if the night itself was listening to her breathing. But suddenly, amid this silence, a quiet creak sounded. A floorboard in the hallway, old, long familiar to Sarah, responded to someone's step. The woman froze, blood congealing in her veins. She lived alone. The children had long since moved away. There were almost no neighbors nearby. Who could be in her house at such an hour? Sarah held her breath, hoping she was mistaken. But the sound repeated. A careful, slow step. As if someone was deliberately trying not to make noise, which only made it more frightening. She instinctively looked at the bedroom door. It was ajar but not locked. The key in the lock had been stuck for a long time, and Sarah kept putting off fixing it. Now this seemed like a fatal mistake. She wanted to convince herself it was just the wind, that a draft had stirred the old boards. But the chill down her spine said otherwise. The steps were getting closer, light but confident, foreign. With each creak of the floorboard, Sarah felt her breathing becoming shorter. She pressed her hand to her mouth so that no sob would escape. The silence was broken only by her wildly beating heart and occasional sounds in the hallway. And then a thought flashed within her. The dream. Michael had warned her. She didn't believe in mysticism. All her life she had been a sensible woman, didn't like fairy tales and omens. But now reason and fear merged into one. Her deceased husband couldn't have appeared just like that. He had come to save her. And that meant one thing. Behind the door there really was danger. Sarah slowly, trying not to make noise, lowered her feet to the floor. The boards beneath them creaked plaintively, and she froze, listening. In the hallway it also became quieter, as if whoever was there had stopped and was now waiting. This silence was worse than the footsteps. You could feel expectation in it. She forced herself to get up with difficulty. Thoughts raced. Lock herself in the room, grab something heavy, call someone. But the phone remained in the kitchen, and to get to the kitchen she would have to pass by the hallway. And then Michael's words surfaced in her memory. Run! Not fight, not hide, but run. He seemed to know that everything else was useless. Sarah crept to the window, but realized it was boarded up with old frames. Opening it quietly wouldn't work. There remained the back door, the door through the kitchen to the garden. If only she could make it in time. She leaned toward the bedroom door. Her ear almost touched the wood. Silence. But a barely audible creak underfoot. Closer now. Someone was right outside her room. Sarah recoiled and felt herself break out in cold sweat. Gathering her last strength, she flung open the door and almost ran through the hallway. Shadows danced on the walls. Her heart thundered so that it seemed everyone would hear it. She was afraid to look back. It seemed that she need only turn her head to see strange eyes burning in the darkness. She ran to the kitchen, nearly falling, grabbed the handle of the back door. The wooden door gave way with a creak. This sound cut through the silence like a knife, and at the same second something thudded dully behind her, as if someone had dropped a boot or heavy object. Sarah didn't hesitate. Pushing the door, she burst into the yard. The night air struck her face like an icy whip, but it felt like freedom. She ran, bare feet slipping on wet earth, thorns digging into her skin, but she felt no pain. Behind her, footsteps sounded again. Now fast, heavy, furious. Her husband's dream had been right. This was no game of imagination. Someone really had come to her house, and if she had stayed in the bedroom, she would already be in their hands. The night air struck her face with the icy breath of freedom. She took several uneven steps along the garden path, and only now realized she was running barefoot. The cold earth burned her feet, small stones and dry twigs dug into her skin, but she didn't notice the pain. Her body worked only on the instinct of survival. The moon hung above the house roof, illuminating the garden with harsh silver light. It seemed every bush, every branch was alive and reaching for her, trying to grab the hem of her nightgown. And suddenly behind her came the slam of a door. Loud and sharp, like a gunshot. Sarah froze for a moment, but her heart immediately prompted, "Can't stop." Someone had been in her bedroom. She heard voices, masculine, rough, muffled. One said, "She was here. I saw the light." Another responded with a low, evil growl, "Find her quickly." Sarah clutched her hands to her chest, as if trying to hold her heart, and rushed forward. Branches whipped her face, hair stuck to her temples, breath tore out with a wheeze, but fear drove her on, stronger than any blow. Behind her came the sound of breaking glass. Someone had smashed a window. Her heart sank. That meant there were at least 2 or 3 of them. They knew she had escaped. They were already coming after her. She turned toward the garden gate, but the boards creaked treacherously loud. "Just don't let them hear," Sarah prayed, but at the same second she heard angry shouts. "They're in the garden!" Heavy, fast footsteps. The men no longer tried to hide. Now they knew their prey was close. Sarah bolted, jumped over an old flower bed, scraping her legs on hard stems, and burst onto the road. Her breathing was ragged, her head spinning, but fear was stronger than exhaustion. Every time she wanted to stop, Michael's voice sounded in her memory, "Run!" This voice was her only protection. The road seemed like salvation to her. Empty, lit only by the dim light of the moon, it stretched in both directions like a river of ashen stone. Sarah ran to the middle and waved her arms, although cars almost never drove here at night. Fire burned in her chest, her breathing was labored, tears blurred her eyes, and suddenly, headlights. Slowly, as if from the darkness itself, a pickup truck approached her. She waved desperately, almost throwing herself under the wheels. The vehicle stopped. Brakes squealed. An elderly man with gray temples and a heavy gaze looked out of the cab. He looked at her with suspicion, but seeing the blood on her legs and desperation in her eyes, immediately opened the door. "Get in, quickly." Sarah climbed into the cab, nearly collapsing onto the seat, and the driver stepped on the gas. The truck started, wheels kicked up dust. She turned around and saw flames burst to life at her house. First a thin flame in the window, then tongues of fire broke out, engulfing the walls. Soon the house that had been her refuge for decades became a huge bonfire. Against the backdrop of the fire, she made out shadows of people darting away into the darkness. They disappeared quickly, understanding that the plan had failed. Her house was doomed, but she herself was saved. Sarah pressed her palms to her face and burst into tears. Tears flowed not only from fear and pain. There was also a feeling of gratitude in them. She understood that if not for the dream, if Michael hadn't come to her that night, she would have remained there inside, and now her life would have ended in flames. She sobbed, looking at the fiery glow, and whispered through her tears, "Thank you, Michael." The driver cast an anxious glance at her, but asked no questions. He simply picked up speed, taking her farther and farther from the burning house, from the night shadows and horror that had burst into her life. And Sarah knew her husband was still nearby. Dead, perhaps, but he was still protecting her. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.